I never thought I would become the villain of my own story. When you grow up watching movies and reading books about betrayal, you always imagine yourself as the one who gets hurt, the one who deserves justice, the one who the audience roots for. You never picture yourself as the person whispering lies into the ear of someone who loves you unconditionally. You never imagine that the worst thing you will ever do in your life will be done to the person who trusted you the most. But here I am. My name is Sophie. I am 32 years old, and I have been carrying a secret that has been eating me alive for the past 3 years. My best friend Rachel has no idea what I did to her. She still calls me her sister from another mother. She still sends me voice notes every morning telling me she loves me. She still invites me to every family dinner, every celebration, every quiet Tuesday evening when she just wants company. And every single time I look into her eyes and smile back at her, I feel like the worst human being who has ever walked this earth. This is my confession. Not because I expect forgiveness, not because I think telling this story will somehow make me a better person, but because if I do not say these words out loud, I am going to lose my mind completely. Rachel and I met when we were 7 years old. Her family moved into the house next door to mine in a quiet suburb just outside of Manchester. I remember the exact moment I first saw her. She was standing in her front garden, holding a bright yellow balloon, and she had the biggest smile on her face. My mother had sent me outside to play, but I did not have many friends back then. I was shy, awkward, the kind of child who preferred books to people. But Rachel walked right up to me that day, handed me her balloon and said, "Do you want to be best friends?" Just like that. No hesitation, no judgment. She saw a lonely girl standing by herself, and she decided in that instant that she was going to change my life. And she did. For the next 25 years, Rachel was my person. She was the one I called when I got my first heartbreak. She was the one who held my hand at my father's funeral. She was the one who believed in me when I did not believe in myself. She was the one who told me I was beautiful when I felt invisible. She was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I destroyed her without her even knowing. The thing about Rachel is that she has always been effortlessly perfect. I do not say that with bitterness anymore, although I used to. When we were teenagers, Rachel was the one all the boys wanted. She had this natural warmth about her that drew people in like moths to a flame. She was not just pretty, she was kind. Genuinely kind. The kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday, who sent thank you cards after every dinner party, who donated to charity without ever posting about it on social media. Meanwhile, I was always the sidekick, the funny one. The one who made people laugh but never made them stay. I told myself for years that I did not mind being in her shadow. I convinced myself that our friendship was built on mutual love and respect. And maybe it was, in the beginning. But somewhere along the way, something inside me shifted. I started keeping score. I started noticing every time she succeeded where I failed. I started resenting her for things she could not control. And that resentment, that quiet, poisonous envy, is what eventually led me to do the unthinkable. When we were 28, Rachel started her own business. She had always been passionate about interior design, and she finally took the leap and opened her own small studio. I was working in marketing at a mid-sized firm in London at the time, struggling to climb the corporate ladder while watching my peers get promoted ahead of me. When Rachel told me about her business, I smiled and hugged her and told her I was so proud of her. And part of me genuinely was. But there was another part, a darker part, that felt like I had been punched in the stomach. How was it possible that Rachel was already living her dream while I was stuck in a cubicle, answering to managers who did not even know my name? How was it fair that everything came so easily to her? I hated myself for feeling that way. I really did. But I could not stop the thoughts from creeping in late at night. I could not stop comparing my life to hers and finding myself lacking. That was the first crack in our friendship, although Rachel never saw it. She was too busy being excited about her new venture to notice that something in me had changed. A year after Rachel opened her studio, she met Daniel. He was everything she had ever wanted in a partner. Tall, charming, successful, with the kind of confidence that made everyone in the room pay attention when he spoke. He worked in finance, something to do with investments that I never fully understood. They met at a networking event, and according to Rachel, it was love at first sight. She called me that night, breathless with excitement, and told me she had just met the man she was going to marry. I laughed and told her she was being dramatic, but within 6 months, they were living together. Within a year, they were engaged. And once again, I found myself standing on the sidelines, watching Rachel's life become more perfect while mine stayed exactly the same. I was single. I was stuck in the same job. I was living in a cramped flat with a roommate I barely tolerated. And Rachel was building the life I had always secretly wanted for myself. When she asked me to be her maid of honor, I said yes immediately. I cried tears that she thought were happy. But part of me, that dark, twisted part that I could not seem to silence, was already starting to plot something terrible. The first time I was alone with Daniel was at Rachel's 30th birthday party. She had rented out a beautiful venue in the countryside, the kind of place with fairy lights strung through the trees and champagne towers, and a live band playing soft jazz. It was magical, the kind of celebration that belonged in a magazine. Rachel was surrounded by people who adored her, laughing and dancing and completely in her element. I was standing by the bar, nursing my 3rd glass of wine, feeling sorry for myself as usual. That was when Daniel walked over. He said something casual, something about how the party was wonderful, but he needed a break from socializing. I laughed and agreed. We started talking, and I wish I could say that I did not feel anything in that moment, but that would be a lie. There was something about the way Daniel looked at me that night, something that made me feel seen in a way I had not felt in years. He asked about my job, my dreams, my life. He seemed genuinely interested. And when he told me I seemed like someone with a lot more going on beneath the surface than people realized, I felt my heart skip a beat. It was innocent. At least, that is what I told myself. It was just a conversation at a party. But looking back now, I know that was the moment everything started to fall apart. Over the next few months, Daniel and I became friends. At least, that is what I called it. He would text me jokes during work meetings. He would send me articles he thought I would find interesting. He would ask for my advice about surprising Rachel for their anniversary or picking out the perfect gift for her birthday. I told myself there was nothing wrong with any of it. He was going to be my best friend's husband. Of course, we needed to have a good relationship. But deep down, I knew something else was happening. I knew that I looked forward to his messages more than I should. I knew that I felt a flutter of excitement every time his name appeared on my phone. And I knew that I was playing with fire. Rachel, of course, was thrilled that Daniel and I were getting along so well. She kept saying how happy it made her that her 2 favorite people in the world liked each other. She had no idea that every time she said those words, a knife twisted deeper in my chest. She trusted me completely, and I was already betraying that trust in ways she could not even imagine. The night it happened, the night everything crossed a line from which there was no return, was a cold evening in December. Rachel was visiting her parents for the weekend. They lived a few hours away, and she went to see them once a month, always alone because Daniel was usually too busy with work. That weekend, Daniel called me and asked if I wanted to grab dinner. He said he was bored at home by himself and could use some company. I should have said no. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to decline, to make up an excuse, to stay home and watch television by myself, but I did not listen. I told myself it was just dinner. 2 friends having a meal together. What could possibly be wrong with that? So I put on a nice dress, did my makeup, and met him at a restaurant in central London. And by the time the night was over, I had done something that I would never be able to take back. We drank too much. That is not an excuse, but it is the truth. We finished 2 bottles of wine between us, and by the time we left the restaurant, we were both unsteady on our feet. Daniel suggested we walk for a bit to sober up before getting taxis home. I agreed. We wandered through the city, talking about everything and nothing, and at some point, we ended up at his flat. The flat he shared with Rachel. I told myself I was just going inside to use the bathroom. I told myself I would call a taxi from there. But when Daniel closed the door behind us and looked at me with those eyes, I did not call a taxi. I did not leave. I stayed. And what happened next is something I have tried to erase from my memory 1,000 times, but it clings to me like a shadow that refuses to fade. I slept with my best friend's fiancé, in the bed that she shared with him, surrounded by photographs of her smiling face. And when I woke up the next morning, the weight of what I had done crashed down on me so hard that I could barely breathe. I left before Daniel woke up. I took a taxi home in silence, staring out the window, unable to process what had happened. My phone buzzed with a message from Rachel, telling me she was having a wonderful time with her parents, and she could not wait to see me when she got back. I read those words and felt physically sick. I spent the entire day in bed, crying into my pillow, hating myself more than I had ever hated anything in my life. I told myself it was a mistake, a one-time lapse in judgment. I would never let it happen again. I would bury this secret so deep that no one would ever find it, and I would spend the rest of my life making it up to Rachel in ways she would never understand. That was the plan. That was what I promised myself. But life, as I have learned, rarely goes according to plan. Daniel called me 2 days later. His voice was casual, as if nothing had happened, as if we had not just shattered everything that Rachel believed in. He said he wanted to talk about that night. He said he did not regret it. He said he had been feeling a connection with me for months, and he was glad we had finally acted on it. I listened to his words in stunned silence, unable to believe what I was hearing. Where was the guilt? Where was the panic? Where was the desperate agreement that we had made a terrible mistake and could never speak of it again? Instead, Daniel was acting like this was the beginning of something, like we had started an affair that he intended to continue. And the worst part, the part that still keeps me up at night, is that for a brief, shameful moment, I considered it. I considered continuing to see him behind Rachel's back. I considered choosing my own selfish desires over 25 years of friendship. That is who I had become. That is what envy and loneliness had turned me into. A person willing to destroy the one person who had always loved me unconditionally. I said no. I told Daniel that what happened was a mistake and could never happen again. I told him he needed to forget about it and focus on his relationship with Rachel. He seemed surprised by my response, almost offended, as if he had expected me to fall at his feet with gratitude. But he agreed to keep our secret. He promised that Rachel would never find out. And for a while, I tried to convince myself that was enough. I tried to go back to normal. I attended their wedding 4 months later, standing beside Rachel in my maid of honor dress, watching her exchange vows with a man I had slept with. I smiled for the photographs. I gave a speech at the reception about how lucky Rachel was to have found her soulmate. I danced with Daniel during the obligatory wedding party dance and pretended that my skin did not crawl at his touch. I thought I was a good enough actress to pull this off forever. I thought I could carry this secret to my grave. But secrets, as I have learned, have a way of demanding attention whether you give it to them or not. The first person who noticed something was wrong was my sister Claire. She has always been able to read me better than anyone, even better than Rachel. A few weeks after the wedding, Claire came to visit me at my flat. She said I had seemed off lately, distant and distracted. She wanted to know if everything was okay. I lied, of course. I told her I was just stressed about work. But Claire did not believe me. She sat on my couch and looked at me with those piercing eyes that always made me feel like she could see straight through to my soul. She said she had noticed the way I looked at Rachel on her wedding day. She said it was not the look of a happy best friend. It was the look of someone carrying a burden too heavy to bear. I felt my heart stop in my chest. For a terrifying moment, I thought she knew. I thought somehow the truth had leaked out, and my entire world was about to collapse. But Claire did not know about Daniel. She thought I was jealous of Rachel's happiness, that I was struggling with being single while my best friend got married. She told me it was okay to feel that way, that it did not make me a bad person. I nodded and let her believe that was the whole story. But her words haunted me long after she left. Because she was right about one thing. I was not the person I used to be. I had become someone I did not recognize, someone capable of unspeakable betrayal. And I had no idea how to find my way back. A year passed. Rachel and Daniel seemed happy. They bought a house together, a beautiful Victorian property in a nice neighborhood. Rachel's business continued to grow. Daniel got a promotion at his firm. They talked about starting a family. And through it all, I played my role as the supportive best friend, helping Rachel pick out paint colors and attending dinner parties at their home, and pretending that everything was fine. But it was not fine. The guilt was destroying me from the inside. I could not sleep. I lost weight. I started having panic attacks in the middle of the night, waking up drenched in sweat, convinced that this was the day Rachel would finally learn the truth. I knew I needed to do something, to find some way to release this pressure building inside me. But I was too much of a coward to confess. I could not bear the thought of losing Rachel. I could not stand the idea of seeing her face when she realized what I had done. So I stayed silent, and the poison continued to spread. Then something unexpected happened. Something that made everything infinitely more complicated. I was at a work conference in Manchester when I ran into James Hartley. James was a senior marketing director at a company we had partnered with a few years earlier. We had worked together briefly and gotten along well, but I had not seen him in almost 2 years. He was at the conference for the same reason I was, and we ended up sitting together at one of the evening networking events. We started talking, catching up on our lives and careers, and then James said something that made my blood run cold. He said he had seen me once, about a year earlier, leaving a restaurant with a man who was not my boyfriend. He said he remembered because I had seemed so happy, laughing and leaning into this man's shoulder. He had almost come over to say hello, but we had left before he got the chance. He asked, with a casual smile, if that man was someone special. I knew immediately what night he was talking about. It was the night I had dinner with Daniel, the night everything went wrong. I felt the color drain from my face as I realized that there was a witness. Someone outside of Daniel and me knew that we had been together, someone who could potentially connect the dots and expose my secret to the world. I managed to keep my composure. I laughed and told James that the man was just a friend, someone I had known for years. James seemed to accept my explanation. He moved on to other topics, and the rest of the evening passed without incident. But I could not shake the feeling that something had shifted. James had seen me with Daniel. He knew what Daniel looked like because he had met him once at a company event Rachel and I had attended together. If James ever mentioned that night to Rachel, if he ever casually brought up seeing me with her husband before they were married, she might start asking questions. And those questions could lead to answers I could not afford to give. I left the conference early the next morning, claiming a family emergency. And for the next several weeks, I lived in constant fear that James would say something, do something, that would bring my entire carefully constructed world crashing down. But James did not say anything. Months passed, and there was no fallout, no awkward phone calls, no confrontations. I began to relax, to convince myself that I had worried over nothing. James had no reason to connect a casual dinner to anything suspicious. He did not know that the man I was with was my best friend's future husband. He did not know the significance of that night. I was safe. Or so I thought. Because life has a way of circling back to the things we most want to forget. And the past, no matter how deeply we try to bury it, always finds a way to resurface. It was Rachel who brought James back into my life. She was expanding her interior design business and needed help with marketing and branding. She asked if I knew anyone who might be able to consult on her project. Without thinking, I mentioned James. He was one of the best in the industry, and I knew he did freelance consulting work on the side. Rachel was thrilled. She asked me to make the introduction. And suddenly, the man who had seen me with Daniel on the worst night of my life was sitting in Rachel's living room, discussing logo designs and target demographics over coffee and biscuits. I watched them chat like old friends, and I felt like I was watching a bomb tick down to zero. Every time James looked at me, I searched his eyes for recognition, for suspicion, for any sign that he was putting the pieces together. But he seemed completely oblivious. He treated me the same way he treated Rachel, with professional warmth and casual friendliness. Maybe I really was safe. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But the anxiety never fully went away, and I started making excuses to avoid being in the same room as James and Rachel together. Around this time, something else started to change. Daniel began texting me again. Not about anything inappropriate at first. Just casual messages, checking in, asking how I was doing. But there was an undertone to his words that made me uncomfortable. He would make comments about how much he enjoyed our conversations, about how he felt like he could talk to me about things he could not share with Rachel. I knew I should shut it down completely, should tell him that we needed to maintain strict boundaries. But I was afraid. Afraid that if I upset Daniel, he might decide to tell Rachel the truth himself. Afraid that my attempt to do the right thing might backfire spectacularly. So I responded to his messages politely but briefly, trying to walk a tightrope between keeping him placated and not encouraging anything further. It was exhausting. Every day felt like navigating a minefield, and I was constantly waiting for an explosion that never came. The explosion, when it finally did come, arrived from a direction I never expected. It was a Tuesday evening in March. Rachel called me, her voice thick with tears, asking if she could come over. She said she needed to talk to someone and she did not know who else to call. I told her, of course, my heart pounding as I imagined 1,000 terrible scenarios. Had she found out? Had Daniel confessed? Was this the moment my life as I knew it ended? When Rachel arrived at my flat, her eyes were red and puffy. She sat on my couch and told me that she had discovered something about Daniel. She had found messages on his phone, messages to another woman, arranging secret meetings and making plans to see each other. Rachel had confronted Daniel and he had admitted to having an affair. But here is the twist, the part that made my head spin. The woman Daniel was seeing was not me. It was someone else entirely. A colleague from his office. Someone Rachel had never met. Daniel had been cheating on Rachel with someone I had never even heard of. I sat there in stunned silence as Rachel sobbed on my shoulder. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was hearing. Daniel was having an affair, a different affair, with a woman who was not me. That meant I was not the only one he had betrayed Rachel with. That meant the night he slept with me was not a moment of weakness. Not a one-time mistake. It was a pattern. Daniel was a serial cheater, a man who had been lying to Rachel from the very beginning. And I had been too blind, too wrapped up in my own guilt, to see it. In that moment, something inside me cracked open. All those months of carrying my secret, of believing that I was the worst person in the world, of thinking that Daniel and I had shared something terrible but unique. It was all built on a lie. Daniel had never cared about me. He had never felt any special connection. He was just a man who took whatever he wanted, regardless of the consequences. And I had been one of many casualties of his selfishness. Rachel decided to leave Daniel. She filed for divorce within the month. It was messy and painful, but she handled it with more grace than I could have imagined. She moved back in with her parents temporarily while she sorted out the legal and financial details. I was by her side through all of it, helping her pack boxes, listening to her cry, reassuring her that she deserved so much better. And every moment of support I provided felt like a lie. Because Rachel still did not know the full truth. She thought Daniel's affair with his colleague was the only betrayal. She had no idea that her best friend, the woman holding her hand through the worst time of her life, had also slept with her husband. The guilt I had been carrying for months intensified into something unbearable. I wanted to confess. I came close so many times, the words forming on my lips, only to die before they left my mouth. But I could not do it. Not now. Not when Rachel was already broken. Not when adding my betrayal to the pile would destroy whatever fragile pieces of herself she was trying to hold together. So I stayed silent. Again. And hated myself more with every passing day. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Rachel threw herself into her work, channeling all of her pain into growing her business. It was her way of coping, of proving to herself that she could survive this. And she did. Her studio expanded. She hired new employees. She started getting featured in design magazines and winning awards. Meanwhile, I watched from the sidelines, still trapped in my guilt, still unable to move forward with my own life. I had tried dating a few times, but every relationship fizzled before it started. I could not let anyone get close. I could not be vulnerable. Because vulnerability required honesty, and I was built on a foundation of lies. I started seeing a therapist, someone recommended by Claire. I never told the therapist the full truth, but I talked around it, describing a betrayal without naming it, exploring my feelings of guilt and shame without confessing their source. It helped, a little. But I knew that real healing would never come until I faced what I had done. 2 years passed. Rachel seemed happier. She had started dating again, a kind man named Marcus who worked as an architect. They had met through a mutual friend, and from the first time I saw them together, I could tell he was different from Daniel. Marcus looked at Rachel like she was the most precious thing in the world. He listened when she talked. He supported her dreams without making everything about himself. He was, in every way that mattered, the partner she deserved. I should have been happy for her, and part of me genuinely was. But another part, that ugly, envious part that I had never quite been able to silence, felt the familiar sting of jealousy. Once again, Rachel was moving forward while I stayed stuck. Once again, she was building a beautiful life while I remained trapped in the wreckage of my own choices. I knew it was not fair to feel that way. I knew I had no right to resent her happiness when I was the one who had betrayed her. But emotions are not always rational, and mine had been twisted into knots for so long that I no longer knew how to untangle them. It was around this time that James Hartley resurfaced in my life. He had continued consulting for Rachel's business, and she had grown to trust him completely. One evening, Rachel invited me to a small dinner party at her new flat. She was celebrating landing a major new client, and she wanted her closest friends there to share the moment. When I arrived, I was surprised to see James among the guests. He greeted me warmly, and we ended up talking for most of the evening. He asked about my work, my life, whether I was seeing anyone. I found myself opening up to him in ways I had not expected, sharing my frustrations and my loneliness without revealing the source of my pain. James listened with genuine interest. He did not offer advice or try to fix me. He just listened. And for the first time in years, I felt something other than guilt and self-loathing. I felt seen. James and I started spending time together outside of work events. Coffee meetings turned into dinner dates, turned into something that felt suspiciously like a relationship. I was terrified. Not of James, who was thoughtful and patient and everything I had never known I needed, but of myself. I did not trust myself to be vulnerable, to be honest, to be a good partner after everything I had done. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for James to discover my secret and run for the hills. But he never did. He knew something was weighing on me. I could see it in his eyes when he looked at me. But he never pushed. He let me come to him in my own time. And slowly, impossibly, I started to fall for him. I started to believe that maybe I could have a future. Maybe I could be happy. Maybe I could be forgiven, even if I never forgave myself. But life, as I have said before, has a cruel sense of timing. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything changed. I was at Rachel's flat, helping her prepare for Marcus's birthday party that weekend. We were in the kitchen, frosting cupcakes and laughing about something ridiculous, when Rachel's phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at it and frowned. Then she looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was confusion mixed with something darker, something that looked almost like betrayal. She asked me if I remembered the night of her wedding rehearsal dinner. I said, of course. She asked if I remembered leaving early because I said I was not feeling well. I nodded, my heart starting to race for reasons I could not yet name. Rachel turned her phone toward me and showed me a photograph. It was a screenshot from an old social media post, one of those automated memories that pops up from years ago. The photograph showed Rachel's rehearsal dinner, a group shot of all the guests. And in the corner of the frame, barely visible but undeniably there, was a reflection in a window. A reflection of me and Daniel, standing far too close together, his hand on my lower back in a way that was anything but friendly. I stared at the photograph, unable to speak. Rachel was still looking at me, waiting for an explanation. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, see her trying to make sense of what she was seeing. I had two choices in that moment. I could lie, come up with some excuse about Daniel being drunk, and me helping him stay upright, or I could finally tell the truth. After 3 years of carrying this weight, of slowly being crushed by my own guilt, I could finally set it down. I looked into Rachel's eyes, the eyes of the woman who had been my best friend since we were 7 years old, and I made my choice. I told her everything. The next hour was the hardest of my life. I told Rachel about the dinner with Daniel that night in December. I told her about what happened afterward, about waking up in her bed filled with shame and self-loathing. I told her about the messages, the ongoing flirtation that I had tried to shut down, the fear and guilt that had been eating me alive for years. I told her how many times I had wanted to confess, how many times I had come close, only to lose my courage. I told her that I had no excuse, no justification, no defense for what I had done. I had betrayed her in the worst possible way, and I deserved whatever anger or hatred she wanted to throw at me. Rachel listened in silence. Her face was completely still, unreadable, like a mask carved from stone. When I finished speaking, she did not say anything for a long time. She just sat there, looking at me, and I could feel 25 years of friendship unraveling between us, like a thread being pulled from a sweater. When Rachel finally spoke, her voice was calm in a way that terrified me. She said she had suspected something for a while, small moments that had not added up, glances between Daniel and me that had felt off. But she had convinced herself she was being paranoid, that her own insecurities were making her see things that were not there. She said discovering Daniel's affair with his colleague had been devastating, but this was something else entirely. This was not just her husband's betrayal. This was mine. The person she had trusted more than anyone in the world, the person she had called her sister. Rachel stood up and walked to the window, her back to me. She said she needed time to think. She said she did not know if she could ever forgive me. She said she wanted me to leave. I gathered my things with shaking hands and walked to the door. Before I left, I turned back and told her that I was sorry, that I knew those words were meaningless, but they were all I had. Rachel did not respond. She did not even turn around. I closed the door behind me and walked out of her flat, and I had no idea if I would ever be welcome there again. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain and uncertainty. I told James what had happened, fully expecting him to end things between us. To my surprise, he stayed. He was shocked, yes, and disappointed in ways he did not try to hide. But he said that people were more than their worst moments, and that my willingness to finally tell the truth meant something. He did not excuse what I had done, but he did not abandon me either. His support was the only thing that kept me standing during that dark time. I cried every day. I barely ate, barely slept. I checked my phone constantly, hoping for a message from Rachel that never came. I had destroyed the most important friendship of my life, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. The truth was finally out. But instead of feeling liberated, I felt more trapped than ever. Now I had to live with the consequences of my actions, and that was somehow worse than carrying the secret had been. A month after my confession, Rachel called me. Her voice was flat, businesslike, the voice of a stranger. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking, and she wanted to meet. She suggested a cafe we used to go to together, a neutral space. I agreed immediately, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. When I arrived, Rachel was already there, sitting at a table by the window with a cup of tea going cold in front of her. I sat across from her and waited, not trusting myself to speak first. Rachel looked tired. There were shadows under her eyes that had not been there before, and something in her expression had hardened, become guarded in a way I had never seen. She said she had spent the past month replaying our entire friendship in her mind, looking for signs she had missed, trying to understand how I could have done what I did. She said she had considered cutting me out of her life completely, and part of her still wanted to. But she also could not ignore 25 years of history, 25 years of memories that she was not ready to throw away. Rachel said she was not ready to forgive me. She did not know if she ever would be, but she was willing to try, slowly, to rebuild something between us. It would not be the same as before. It could never be the same as before. But maybe, with time, we could find a new version of our friendship, one built on honesty instead of secrets. She said she needed me to understand that I had broken her trust in a way that might never fully heal. She said there would be boundaries now, distances that had not existed before. But she was not ready to say goodbye. Not yet. Tears streamed down my face as I listened to her words. I had not expected a second chance. I had not expected anything but rejection and silence. But here was Rachel, offering me more grace than I deserved, more compassion than I had earned. I told her I understood. I told her I would do whatever it took to prove that I was worthy of her trust, even if it took the rest of my life. Rachel nodded slowly. She did not reach across the table to take my hand. She did not smile, but she also did not leave. And in that moment, that small, fragile moment, I felt something I had not felt in years. Hope. Rebuilding my relationship with Rachel has been the hardest thing I have ever done. It has been 2 years since that conversation in the cafe, and we are still not back to where we used to be. Maybe we never will be, but we are trying. We meet for coffee once a month. We text sometimes, short messages about nothing important. She invited me to her wedding when she married Marcus last spring, although I was not the maid of honor this time. That role went to her sister, and I understood completely. I sat in the audience and watched her walk down the aisle toward a man who truly loved her, and I felt nothing but gratitude that she was finally getting the happiness she deserved. I cried during the ceremony, and this time, the tears were genuinely happy. Marcus is good for her. He knows about what I did because Rachel told him everything, and he has been civil to me without being warm. That is fair. I do not expect warmth from the people who love Rachel. I just hope that in time, they might see that I am not the same person I was 3 years ago. James and I got engaged last month. He proposed on a quiet beach during a weekend trip to Cornwall, and I said yes without hesitation. I never imagined I could have a relationship like this, one built on honesty and mutual respect, one where my partner knows my darkest secrets and chooses to stay anyway. I still struggle sometimes. I still wake up in the middle of the night, haunted by memories of what I did, by the pain I caused, by the person I used to be. But I am learning to forgive myself, slowly, one day at a time. My therapist says that self-forgiveness is not about excusing what I did, but about accepting that I cannot change the past and choosing to be better in the future. I am trying. I really am. I volunteer now, working with a charity that supports survivors of domestic abuse. I am honest with the people in my life, even when it is difficult, even when the truth makes me uncomfortable. I am building a life that I can be proud of, one choice at a time. But there is still one secret I carry. One thing I have never told anyone, not James, not my therapist, not even Rachel. The night I spent with Daniel was not the first time I betrayed my best friend. It was just the biggest betrayal, the most obvious one, the one that finally forced me to face what I had become. But the truth is, I had been betraying Rachel in smaller ways for years. Every time I felt jealous of her success and smiled instead of being honest. Every time I gossiped about her behind her back to people who did not matter. Every time I secretly hoped something would go wrong in her life so I could feel better about my own. Those small betrayals accumulated over time, poisoning our friendship long before Daniel entered the picture. He was just the symptom. The disease was inside me all along, a sickness of envy and insecurity that I had been nurturing since we were teenagers. I do not know if Rachel ever sensed that darkness in me. I do not know if she ever felt the distance I created with my jealousy. But I know it was there. And I know that healing fully means acknowledging all of it, not just the parts that are easy to confess. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Rachel had never found that photograph. If I had been able to carry my secret forever, never telling her the truth, living alongside her as the loyal friend she believed I was. Would I have been happier? Would I have been at peace? I like to think the answer is no. I like to believe that the guilt would have destroyed me eventually, that I would have cracked under the weight of it no matter what. But part of me is not sure. Part of me thinks I might have gone my entire life pretending, playing a role, never facing the consequences of my actions. And that terrifies me, because it suggests that I am capable of more deception than I want to admit. It suggests that honesty did not come naturally to me, that it had to be forced out by circumstances beyond my control. I am trying to be a better person now, but I cannot forget who I was. I cannot pretend that version of me does not still exist somewhere, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for weakness to let her out. Rachel asked me recently why I did it, why I slept with Daniel, knowing what it would do to her if she ever found out. She said she had been trying to understand for 2 years, and she still could not wrap her head around it. I wanted to give her a good answer, an answer that made sense, an answer that would help her forgive me. But the truth is, I do not fully understand it myself. I was lonely. I was jealous. I was drunk and feeling invisible and desperate for someone to make me feel wanted. Daniel paid attention to me in a way no one had in years, and I let that attention override everything I knew was right. It was selfish and weak and inexcusable. But it was also profoundly human. I am not saying that to excuse myself. I am saying it because I think it is important to acknowledge that good people are capable of terrible things, that the line between hero and villain is thinner than we like to believe, that we are all just one bad decision away from becoming the monster in someone else's story. I told Rachel that I could not give her a satisfying explanation because there was not one. I told her that I had spent years trying to understand my own actions and still came up short. I told her that all I could offer was my commitment to being different, to never betraying her again, to spending the rest of my life trying to be worthy of a friendship I had nearly destroyed. Rachel listened quietly. Then she said something that surprised me. She said she thought, in a way, my honesty after all these years meant more than if I had never betrayed her at all. She said anyone can be trustworthy when it is easy, when there is nothing to tempt them. But choosing to tell the truth when it costs you everything, when there is no guarantee of forgiveness, when you could have gotten away with silence forever, that requires a different kind of courage. She said she was not sure she could have done the same in my position. And while she still carried pain from what I did, she also carried a strange kind of respect for the choice I finally made. I do not know if I deserve that respect, but I am grateful for it, more grateful than I can say. This is my confession. Not a pretty story with a clean ending, but a messy, complicated truth about the worst thing I have ever done and the long, painful process of trying to make it right. Rachel still has scars from my betrayal, and so do I. We are both different people than we were 3 years ago, shaped by pain and loss, and the difficult work of rebuilding trust. But we are still here, still trying, still holding on to the thread of a friendship that somehow survived the worst storm either of us has ever faced. I do not know what the future holds for us. I do not know if we will ever be as close as we once were, or if the distance between us will slowly grow until we drift apart entirely. But I know that I will never stop trying. I will never stop showing up, being honest, choosing to be better. Because Rachel gave me a second chance when she did not have to. And I refuse to waste it. If you are listening to this and you have done something terrible, something you think you can never come back from, I want you to know that it is not too late. It is never too late to tell the truth. It is never too late to face the consequences of your actions and choose to be different. The path forward will not be easy. It will hurt more than you can imagine. But it is the only path that leads somewhere worth going. I spent 3 years hiding, pretending, slowly dying inside from the weight of my own guilt. And then I told the truth, and it nearly destroyed everything. But it also set me free. Not completely, not all at once, but enough. Enough to breathe again, enough to hope again, enough to believe that I might someday become the person I always wished I could be. My name is Sophie. I am 32 years old. I betrayed my best friend in the worst possible way, and for 3 years, she had no idea. But now, she knows. And somehow, miraculously, we are still standing. The end of my story is not written yet. Neither is yours. All we can do is choose, every day, to write it with honesty and courage, and the willingness to face ourselves in the mirror. That is what I am trying to do. That is all any of us can do. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough.